Good day, everyone. Today we will explore the book Lumad Mindanao, published by the National Museum of the Philippines in 2020. This was during pandemic. So the work serves as both museum companion and cultural map, guiding us through the histories, language, and life ways of the Lumad people. So the indigenous communities of Mindanao who are neither Muslims nor Christians. So the term Lumad itself means Lumad is a Cebuano term, which means born of the earth or native. So it symbolizes deep belonging, a bond between people and their ancestral land, more than an ethnographic label. So it has become a political and cultural or statement of identity and resistance. Um, as we move through this lecture, we reflect on three major questions. First is how does Lumad Mindanao present indigenous identity and worldview? When you say Lumad Mindanao here, it refers to the book. And number two, what challenges do Lumad people face today? And three is how can we, as students, scholars, educators, engage with their story responsibly. So to understand the Lumad, we begin with the basics. As most of us know that there are 18 major groups, at least 18 major Lumad ethno-linguistic groups. So this includes the common that we usually know, the group are these are the Manubo, Hiligaunon, Sabanon, Bagubo, Mandaya, Tibuli, among others. So they inherit the mountain ranges, they inhabit, the mountain ranges and river systems of Mindanao. Example, we have the Kitanglad, Diwata, and upper ranges, the Gusan Marsh, and the Pulangi River Basin. So their territories, as presented in the book, are called ancestral domains, are not just sources of livelihood, but sacred homelands. So each mountain, forest, and rivers has a spirit. Each community has a story that connects them to the landscape. So the book makes this point clearly. So the Lumad world is not defined by isolation, but by connection. So connection to the land, to the spirits, and the one another through kinship and language. So here, we talk about language. One of the most striking insights of the book from the book is the role of language in shaping identity. So each Lumad group seeks a unique tongue that encodes not just communication but worldview. So through oral tradition, we can say that epics, chants, genealogies, history is remembered not as dates of or wars, but as relationship. So language actually binds them to their ancestors and define their place in the world. So migration, if we talk about the book, it mentions there the trade and migration across Mindanao have many Lumad communities multilingual, capable of switching between their native language, Cebuano, and even Tagalog, and form adapt and of a form of adaptation that also serve a quiet resistance, preserving their voice amid um, external pressures. Then, when we talk about geography, we can also see that the geography of Mindanao is a teacher in itself. Like Lumad Mindanao portrays a world where ecology and spirituality are inseparable. From the Lumad worldview, for the Lumad, the earth is not only a resource; it's like a relative. Mountains are homes of guardian spirits. Rivers are lifelines connecting communities. And forests are classrooms where knowledge of plants, medicines, and ritual is passed down. So rituals for planting, hunting, and even healing are ways of maintaining balance between the human and spiritual realms. And then at the same time, excuse me, sorry, I was kind of distracted. At the same time, um, we can see that, as I mentioned, rituals for planting, hunting, and healing are ways of maintaining balance between the human and spiritual realm. So when balance is lost through disrespect and greed, illness or misfortune follows. So this is how the experiences of the Lumad, at the same time, their belief system, that this worldview offers a profound alternative to Western ideas of progress, where modern development seek control and extraction. Lumad philosophy emphasizes reciprocity and balance. And then to talk about material culture. In the book, one of the most visually engaging part of the book is its focus on material culture. So the crafts, the textiles, the tools, and that expresses Lumad creativity and identity. In the book, for example, it shows the tinalak textile of the Tibuli people, woven by women known as dream weavers. So it is said that the patterns came to them. Um, it shows that the patterns came to them in dreams sent by spirits. So every design holds symbolic meaning like fertility, unity, peace, and weaving itself is a sacred duty. So other crafts also like the brass works of the Mranao and the basketry of the Bagubo shows how artistry, economy, and spirituality intertwine. So these are not simple folk arts for display. So they are living technologies of survival and identity. However, the book also warns us of the danger of commercialization and cultural extraction. Tourism and mass production can strip crops from their meaning, unfortunately. Thus, cultural preservation must always go hand in hand with community ownership. So another part of the book mentions about history and encounters. So here, the Lumad story cannot be separated from the broader history of Mindanao and even the Philippines as a whole, as history shaped by encounter, displacement, and resilience. In fact, before Spanish colonization, Mindanao, a Lumad groups traded already with coastal Moro communities, like exchanging forest goods for salt, cloth, and even metal. So they established peace pacts, like there's what we call Diandi and Tampuda, sophisticated system of indigenous diplomacy, long before the concept actually of statehood. But colonization, unfortunately, brought profound disruptions. So Spanish and later American regimes labeled them as pagan tribes. Some books would even say wild tribes, forcing relocation to the upland, taking fertile lands for plantation and settlers. So, despite these pressures, the Lumad actually resisted not only through arms, but through cultural endurance, maintaining, when you say cultural endurance, maintaining their customs, songs, and even governance system across generation. So, fast forward, we talk about the Lumad Mindanao in the 21st century. The challenges actually remains. The book actually closes with a sobering reminder that Lumad communities continue to face land disposition, militarization, and even school closures. Their ancestral lands are often targeted for resource extraction, and their community schools, the Lumad schools that we call, which teach literacy alongside indigenous knowledge, are sometimes vilified or even shut down. Yet, Lumad are not silent. Across Mindanao, they organized, Lumad group organized for ancestral domain rights under the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act, or we call IPRA. So they participate in peace building and environmental advocacies. Their movements connect with global indigenous struggles for land, not only land, but even language and justice. So here, with, we talk about representation and education. Um, in your screen, you can see that from object of study to partners and language, and partners and knowledge is what they want. So now, as now, what makes Lumad Mindanao important actually, um, the book is what made it important as educators, students, scholars, and even as citizens. It challenges us how we see and talk about indigenous people. Historically, museums and textbooks have portrayed the Lumad as primitive, unfortunately, or vanishing. This book flips that narrative, showing that a living, dynamic culture capable of shaping their own modernities. It reminded us that representation must be collaborative. Collaborative, like we can't speak of indigenous communities. We must create spaces where they can speak with us, well, where they can speak with and through us. For example, the National Museum now engage Luma builders and cultural workers as partners in curations, ensuring that the stories displayed are told in the voices of those who live them. And then some lessons and reflections from this book. There are three lessons that stands out for me. First is indigenous knowledge is intellectual heritage. So when you say it's intellectual heritage, the Lumad worldview offers deep ecological wisdom that modern society urgently need today. Kailangan natin. And then number two is culture and land are inseparable. Protecting indigenous culture uh, means defending ancestral domains. Without land, ritual, language, and identity fade. The number three is um, repre- repres- representation is a form of power. So when you say representation is a form of power, it tells the story. Who tells the story matters. Like museums, schools, and even our classrooms must be spaces that amplify indigenous perspective, not silence them. So development must also include consent, balance, and reciprocity. And then to just a closing, but we will be discussing this one also in next videos. Like, how can indigenous values reshape ideas of development? What responsibilities does museum and universities have? How do Lumad struggles mirror global indigenous movements? So there's very interesting points that we will discuss in the next video. But just a closing thought um, for this book is that as we conclude, I want you to think of Lumad Mindanao not just as a museum book, but as a living document, one that asks us to listen, to reflect, and to act. As mentioned earlier, Lumad are not relics of distant past. They are our contemporaries, stewards of knowledge, defenders of land, and storytellers of a deeper, more relational way of being Filipino. Their message is clear. We are born of the earth. When the earth is at peace, we are at peace. That, I believe, is the heart of the book Lumad Mindanao and the heart of indigenous um, philosophy. So the Lumad story invites us to listen, reflect, and act with respect. I hope from this discussion, you get to know more about our indigenous communities, particularly the Lumads of Mindanao. And I hope, as bearers of modern culture, we will give more space to the stories and narratives of the indigenous communities. We'll be patient enough to understand fully their stories and also their context. I hope you learned something from this video, and I hope to see you in the next discussion. As I mentioned with the discussion prompt that I mentioned on this slide, we will discuss this at the next video. So thank you, everyone. I will end this presentation now. Thank you.